Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biollywood. In this podcast, we talk about biological threats and pop culture they appear in. I'm J.T. O'Brien, Research Principal at the Bipartisan Commission on Biodefense, and I'm here with the Commission's Executive Director, Dr. Asha M. George.
Hi.
Today, we'll be discussing the historical drama TV series Vikings Valhalla, and specifically, we'll be looking at Season 3, Episode 2, which is titled Honor and Dishonor. This episode, released on July 11th, 2024, was directed by David Frazee and written by Jessica Sinyard. In this episode, the Vikings face numerous challenges as they navigate their way through political intrigue and warfare, and one of the key plot points involves the use of a biological weapon in the form of a fungus, which is used to attack the stronghold of Jomsburg. If you have not seen this episode or Vikings Valhalla, we highly recommend you do so before continuing this podcast. The podcast will contain spoilers for this episode and likely for the rest of the series. This is your final warning, and from this point forward, we will discuss spoilers. So I think we should start by talking about, the fungi attack and kind of how it played out. And it's interesting to look at. I think we should also look at the historical kind of context of whether or not this was possible, and it was something that could have happened during that time.
Yeah.
So it seems like, to me at least, from what I was doing in some of the research, is that the fungus is called Aminata phyloides, which is commonly known as the death cap, and it originates in Europe. And the reason I thought it was this one is because it is a close relative of Aminata muscaria, which is a mushroom that produces a hallucinogenic effect that Vikings reportedly would take before battle to make them less afraid, more, more ruthless in battle and things like that. So the phyloides, the poisonous one, is the most poisonous of all known mushrooms. It's estimated that as little as half of just one mushroom could kill an adult. And it's also the deadliest mushroom worldwide, responsible for about 90% of mushroom-related fatalities every year, including to this day. And it's also been... It's not, the toxicity is not affected or reduced by cooking, drying, or freezing. So it survives all of that. And there's been quite a few historical cases of this mushroom being used in assassination attempts, going back as far as 54 AD with the Roman Emperor Claudius and extending all the way to the year 1740, in which the Holy Roman Emperor Charles VI was suspected to have been poisoned with this mushroom. And even as recently as July of 2023, a woman in Australia was charged with cooking a beef Wellington for 4 people that was contaminated with this.
Wow.
And she was charged for murder.
Wow.
And 3 of the 4 guests that ate it did end up dying of the poisoning.
Oh my gosh.
So I think it is really interesting. Like, there is historical precedent. The show takes place around 1000-ish AD. So going back from 54 to 1740, it seems like this was a well-known mushroom, and it was well known that it was poisonous throughout this time period. So I think that this is probably the most likely one, and especially given its relationship and its close relationship with the ones that Vikings were suspected to have actually used, would make sense. And then also, since this one is thermostable and you don't have to, or if you cook it, it doesn't reduce the toxicity, I think that lends to the fact, because what we see in this episode is flour was the contaminated product.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, that there are other fungi that produce toxins that also survive all kinds of processes, even modern day processes.
Right.
So my first question when I watched this was, is this realistic in terms of baking? They get it in the flour, they bake it in the flour, but also it's not even that. I think what's interesting is, well, first of all, going back to my first point, aflatoxin, for example, survives baking.
Right.
And I think some of the other mycotoxins do too. But in this case, the mushrooms are just like picked and put whole into this giant barrel of flour. And it's not that people scooped out the mushroom like the Australian woman and chopped it up and put it into something. It's that they just took some cups of flour out of the big barrel and went off to bake stuff, bake bread, which means that this mushroom is so powerful. It just sort of pervaded, its toxicity pervaded an entire barrel of flour that had been processed. So it just speaks to how strong it must have been.
Yeah, and there's been like research done, and they actually do suggest, like, if you do end up picking this mushroom, do not mix it or combine it with anything else that you plan on eating, because it can contaminate, just surface contamination.
Okay.
I'm not sure why you'd be picking it and putting it in with your other food. Maybe for research purposes or something like that, but that is a recommendation that experts make, is to not even let it touch other food.
So could it be weaponized? I mean, other than the way they do it in this show, can it be? It
has been isolated, the toxin. So I would assume yes, it can be weaponized, because they have been able to just isolate the amatoxin straight from the mushroom. So I don't see any reason why it couldn't be weaponized in the way that you would think about something like anthrax or along those lines.
Well,
I'm not sure if you can make it inhalable, but
I don't know. Maybe you can. If you. I think the question is, at what point have you destroyed it?
Right.
But if it's produced, it's not the mushroom itself that anybody cares about. It's the toxin that the mushroom contains.
Right.
And we know that there are all kinds of things, all kinds of toxins that have been weaponized. So I think it would be a matter of extracting the toxin from the mushroom and making sure it survives that process, and then weaponizing it, powdering it, or aerosolizing it, or doing something like that. Certainly, there are other things that we've encountered. It's the Biological and Toxin Weapons Convention. So we're worried about toxins too. I don't think we talk about this enough. I think everybody's on about smallpox and anthrax and brucellosis and tularemia and plague and other high level A, level B biological agents, but we don't really talk about toxins, with the exception, I think, of Clostridium botulinum, which causes botulism. We don't talk about the rest. I think we probably should. There's a lot we should be concerned about with regard to the food supply, and not just this particular thing, because obviously everybody seems to know what it is, and there are warnings about it, and people are being charged with murder if they use it. There are other things too. We do have the example of aflatoxin, and having realized that Iraq had weaponized aflatoxin, which also comes from a mushroom or from fungi, back during Desert Storm. And it's just an interesting thing about that. We don't know what happened to it. The UNSCOM inspectors found out that Iraq had weaponized it, but they don't know what happened to it, what happened to the small amount that they had weaponized.
Right.
There's no evidence that it was destroyed, but there's also no evidence that it wasn't destroyed, I guess.
Right.
It could have been transferred somewhere. There was a lot that was weird about the biological weapons program in Iraq, and how it was kind of sort of destroyed after Desert Storm. And Iraqi certification or whatever that it had been destroyed. But I only mention it because aflatoxin, there were a lot of questions about aflatoxin. Why would they weaponize it? Is it useful or not? Aflatoxin is known to cause cancer in people, like 50 years from the point of ingestion or exposure. So everybody was saying, why would anybody weaponize something that causes cancer in 50 years? So I think it's just an interesting, this group of biological agents or potential biological agents, I think is interesting. Aflatoxin could cause cancer in 50 years, but aflatoxin has also been known to kill an entire village in Africa that ingested it accidentally, and they all died the next day, or they were dead by the next day of liver failure.
Yeah.
So clearly it affects the liver, and this TV show's version also affects the liver.
Right.
But I would just say that there's also the question of whether a country would use something as a biological weapon that has long-term debilitating effects.
Right.
I think that we don't spend enough time in the United States trying to think like our enemies, and instead spend too much time thinking about, well, what we would do and what our thoughts are and how we would approach something. But if you look at some of our adversaries, or just foreign countries in general, China has a 100-year plan.
Yeah.
Russia has a 100-year plan. People are in it for the long term. And if you have a 100-year plan, or any plan, let's just say you have a plan for 2 months, and you come in and you say to me, okay, well, in 1 month, this is what's going to happen. If that would seem like, okay, that's on the path. That's on the path. Right. So if they have a 100-year plan, and at year 50, you expect all the people who ingested this particular aflatoxin-containing mushroom now have cancer, that's not. Why would that be considered a bad outcome? I think we just have to consider more ways in which biological agents could be used as weapons and what kind of outcomes there are. It's not just about what's happening on the battlefield this instant.
Right.
Or it doesn't have to be. But anyway, that's kind of a tangent about aflatoxin. It's just, I wanted to mention it because it's something that we've all been concerned about since Desert Storm. And if nothing else, whether we think there was a good reason for Iraq to weaponize it or not, they did weaponize it. So I think if they could weaponize aflatoxin, then they could weaponize the toxin that is associated with this mushroom in this particular episode.
Yeah.
And the episode does a good job of showing, like, you don't have to have a nation-state level program to expose people to something that could kill them, or at least make them extremely, extremely sick.
Yeah, and let's remember the person who did this, Magnus, is only one person. He doesn't necessarily have the same kind of support of, like a nation state, even during that time, as like a king or anything like that. He doesn't have that kind of infrastructure or support.
But don't you think it's interesting, too, that the guy who comes to visit the village, the new guy, Stigger, he knows. As soon as he sees that all these people are going down with this, he figures out, he diagnoses it. Okay, it's a fungal toxin, they've been exposed, right?
Yeah.
And off he goes to find the medical countermeasure that might or might not work. I thought that was realistic. It might work. I'm glad he said that. But what's the one thing I thought was, how could it be that everybody doesn't know about this? That everybody doesn't know that there's a mushroom that can do this?
Right.
It's not something that he had to go like digging through the annals from millennia ago in Sweden to find some mention of some crazy mushroom, and he had to go off into the wilderness to go find it. The Stigger knew about it.
Immediately.
That means other people should have. So I was a little unimpressed with that. It seems to me that somebody other than the new guy should have known that in the village.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that they had insufficient protections or testing or something in place.
Right.
They didn't find out about it until someone said they didn't find out about it until they started to investigate after the fact.
Right, and then they found it in the flour.
Which, by the way, is as realistic as it is today. We
Right.
do have a
Yeah.
tendency to
We have to do the investigation and.
But I do think this though. I found out after looking at this that wheat is highly susceptible to contamination by fungal toxins.
Really?
So it could be this one, it could be, aflatoxin, it could be whatever. Yeah. During storage and transportation, specifically.
So those are the two.
So those
entry
are the
points.
Vulnerabilities, in the supply chain. But also that symptoms can begin 2 to 9 hours after exposure. And I thought that was
It's very
realistic for the
fast
show.
acting. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And even with this specific one, like the symptoms can appear very rapidly.
Mm-hmm.
You could have death within a couple of days. And I thought it was interesting when I was looking at the treatments for this. There really aren't any, there's not like an antidote that will 100% cure you.
Okay, so, but go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No. So the the most promising interventions I found were all IV interventions. So
IV?
IV.
Oh,
like
IV.
Intravenous.
Okay.
Intravenous. So
we're talking about plants. It could have been the other kind of IV.
It could have been, yeah. So like intravenous penicillin has reported to have some benefit. Trials with cephalosporins, which I think come from another fungus, have shown promise. And then intravenous silibinin, which comes from blessed milk thistle.
Okay.
I couldn't find anything about tubers specifically,
well,
but
I did.
I could believe that. I could believe that there's something that they could have found, and especially if Steger was that smart, and I don't know, maybe he's well traveled. He has seen more of the world than a lot of these people have. They all grew up in that
one
in
area,
Jomsburg, so they might not know about it. But he's well traveled, so
I did find that some tubers do contain antibiotics.
They do.
Whether the tubers would contain antibiotics
that also are
that would be applicable to this, I don't know. It's an interesting question because there are vaccines for some fungal infections. Fungi are interesting, right? They fall in the middle between bacteria and, well, I shouldn't say middle. It's just obviously it's a third category of organisms. But so I thought it's not beyond the pale. It's not beyond realistic.
Right.
It's at least it's possible. There are tubers that contain antibiotics.
Yeah.
So
it's possible.
Okay.
It is interesting though why antibiotics work.
Yeah.
Because they say they don't, like, I wasn't able to find any reason why people say the exact mechanism is unknown as to why antibiotics help, because you wouldn't think that they would, because antibiotics are really only for bacteria.
Yeah.
But there must be some kind of...
There must be something.
Yeah, maybe some kind of old evolutionary relationship between bacteria and fungi. I'm not sure, but... Maybe.
Yeah, maybe something has diverted. But, we have a recommendation in the Athena agenda to implement our Apollo program for biodefense, which is to develop at least one vaccine candidate for each of the 26 viral families that infect human beings. So do you think, given what we've seen in this particular scenario, that we should be trying to develop vaccine candidates for fungi as well?
I think personally that therapeutics would probably be the better route for fungi, because you don't want to go vaccinating an entire population for something that's, one, not contagious, and two, might not even happen. Why take the risk in vaccinating the whole population against it?
Right. So in this case, you would be saying we should go find the tubers.
Yes, I would be.
Okay.
I would be doing what Sigurd did. I'd say let's go find the tubers.
But I think that the point is still made, whether you're going after the fact with therapeutics or before the fact with vaccines or antibiotics or whatever it might be. Either way, we're talking about developing for a family or at least one thing in a family.
In a family.
And I think that would apply here too.
Yeah, it'd be like a broad spectrum therapeutic or a specific therapeutic. For
at least getting a start.
Yeah.
Yeah. It might not be that what you have done for one, like for aflatoxin, would be applicable directly here.
Right.
But the methodology to develop it for what produces aflatoxin could be the same methodology that you use to develop for what produced the toxin in this show.
Right.
Right?
Right.
So I think it's worth doing. I think also it just did such a good job of showing, like, you may not have time. We may not have time like we did for COVID.
People are dying within hours.
2 to 9 hours.
Yeah. What are you gonna do?
Yeah. Well, and I think that there are military applications here that we're not really considering. 2 to 9 hours could change. It could change the course of an entire war, I think.
Yeah, and I think that was Magnus's intent.
Yeah.
In going there, he only went there with a small. I don't know. We don't actually see him in this episode take over the town, but that's what ends up happening.
Okay.
When he goes over there to retrieve his father's body under that, under that guise, he does take over the town. So it was a softening the battlefield. It was asymmetric warfare because he doesn't have the same resources as his, I think his half brother, King Svein. So this was his plan to go and get his father's body, take revenge on Freydis, who killed his father, and take revenge on that whole town. And there was also the religious component as well, because Jomsburg was pagan primarily. And most of the other Viking communities have been Christianized at this point.
Yeah.
So there were several motives there for Magnus.
Well, and I think given that particular storyline, the head of this village, country, area, whatever, she knows this. She makes mention of it during the episode, or one of the one after or the one before, I don't know, where she says we're surrounded, by Christians. So I think while she did a good job of fighting people off, obviously, she did not do a good job of securing the supply chain. She did not do a good job of identifying vulnerabilities, whether they're in the supply chain or not, and then strengthening those.
Right.
And she did not do some of the things that she could have. Of course, she didn't know. But, now, after the fact, if I were her, I'd be going out and gathering up all those tubers, as many tubers as I could, and just having them.
Like a stockpile.
We need to stockpile them. And that's something they could stockpile, and the whole problem with rotating stock. Clearly, those tubers are ingestible, so they should just be growing them somewhere and stockpiling them, and then utilizing them to eat or whatever else you do with those tubers, and then moving the stockpile, replenishing and refreshing the stockpile over and over again.
Warm basing it almost.
Yeah,
we talk about today.
Yeah,
keeping a warm base with. With a second use that it could be for food or whatever in this case. But also then you always have it on the ready if you need it for an attack.
Yeah. I think too, JT, I don't know if this was intentional during the episode, but there's like a celebration, isn't there? Isn't there a party or something going on? Is it maybe summer solstice? Something is happening.
Something like that. And
I felt like that's fine. I mean, you shouldn't go through life and never celebrating something. Yeah. And, it's important. Religion is important. But my feeling about it was they defeated some enemies.
Yeah.
And then just sort of rested. Like, okay, we're fine. I mean, it looked like she probably had there were some guards, there was something going on. But it wasn't enough. I think that she wasn't staying on top of changes in the threat landscape.
Right.
That Sig knew what this was is an important point. He knew what it was. I don't know if he said it had been used to attack people before,
Right.
but he knew what it was. She had no idea. It was which means the whole village had never heard of it, had never seen it, didn't know anything. It just, to me, it just speaks to the need to go back and A, look at the variety of threats, B, ask this question, okay, this looks like it's naturally occurring. Could it be weaponized?
Right.
Or is this naturally occurring thing something that could affect our national security, even without weaponizing it? And then C, I think you have to then say, okay, well, where are we with our own defense? And you need to just continuously refresh it.
Right.
One of our recommendations from our 2015 Blueprint for Biodefense was to tell DoD, hey, your policies are outdated. The last time they redid them was like back in the maybe like the early 80s or something, based on a variety of countries, including our own country, having an offensive or having offensive biological weapons programs. And that's ridiculous. We know that Russia and North Korea have active offensive biological weapons programs now. We think that whatever's going on in China and Iran could at least be turned to do BW if they're not already involved in BW. We definitely were very happy to hear the Department of Defense go ahead and do a biodefense posture review that they released, I guess, last year now. But we want to see them, again, nobody should be resting and saying, okay, we did this review, or nothing's happened and now we're done and we can wait for another 40, 50 years. We think it should be refreshed quadrennially. But I would also say some of it kind of depends on what's going on in the world. I don't think they should be waiting around for another 4 years just to do it. We saw an article in the Washington Post recently about Russia, improving upon one of its
old
BW plants.
Right.
Actually, I don't even call it a plant. It was like a whole campus, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
And Putin's not even holding it back. He's not denying it.
Yeah.
He's just saying this is what we have. Same thing now, I think, with North Korea. They're pretty like, hey, we're on top of things.
Yeah.
I think as we see the threat shift and things happening, I think we should be saying, okay, let's take that information and immediately put it into our biodefense posture review or whatever to make necessary changes. So we just shouldn't be, there's no need, in other words, to wait for 4 years. If you look at the situation in this TV show, it would be crazy for her to do that, right? For her to have sustained an attack and then say, okay, well, Congress told us we don't have to do this for another 4 years, so we're just going to wait around. They need to do it, and she needs to make sure that this information is passed on to the next generation, because she obviously didn't get it.
Right, exactly. So she needs to make sure the information is passed on. They need to have a plan for strengthening the supply chain. Mm-hmm. Take a look at the flour, sift it.
Yeah.
Do something with it.
Right.
And that needs to be done immediately. Now I'm sure it's probably difficult because most of the population of the village has died. But regardless, you still need to be prepared for it. Mm-hmm. And now she should be prepared for like a land-based attack.
That's interesting. That's really interesting, because what you're saying is that was a leading...
It was a softening of the battlefield.
A softening of the battlefield thing, which we have seen in some of the other things that we've been watching.
And it's usually seems to be used in a more like primitive time. I think we saw like with the 100. So, in a post-apocalyptic scenario where regular warfare isn't really the same.
Right.
And in the situation in the early thousands.
Yeah.
So definitely like more of a primitive time, but it's useful because there's not very many ways I think you can reduce a force, and that is like a much bigger factor I think back then than it is today. Mm-hmm. You could have a SEAL team, do, kind of outsize a bigger force. But in this case, I don't think, with actual people in hand-to-hand combat, you'll be overwhelmed, I think, too quickly if you had like a small force. So I think it might have been, maybe it was more common back then to try and use these tactics of softening the battlefield.
Yeah, I don't know. The Vikings weren't great at maintaining written records.
No, they were not. So we don't know.
we don't really know.
Yeah.
But I think there is a point to be made that it doesn't have to take high technology,
exactly,
CRISPR,
you don't need
desiccators, and all of that to attack people. Now, and we know this. This is why we worry about being poisoned, either intentionally or unintentionally. But I think that we do have a tendency to think that it takes a nation state, with all of its resources and investing in laboratories and investing in all these scientists and investing all this stuff for things to happen. But many of the biological events that we see, and we keep track, year after year after year, a lot of them are like this. Intentional poisoning, intentionally introducing like spoiled foods in places, getting a hold of things that don't really take a lot to get a hold of in the first place, because it's just sort of out there naturally, like these mushrooms.
Right. Or think about the Rajneesh.
Yeah.
Cult. If you put salmonella in a salad bar.
Yeah.
That was it. And super low tech.
Super low tech. And here we are. Our biosurveillance capabilities in this country and elsewhere are just they're not good enough even to pick up on diseases as they are occurring. Right. Let alone detecting something before anybody even gets sick.
Right.
I don't know what the answer is. It's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. But I think a lot of people are increasingly concerned about the food supply. We do have a lot of testing that goes on. I don't want to, imply to our listeners that we do not have testing. We do have testing, but we do not test every single thing that goes through the entire food chain from farm all the way to fork. We don't do it. We can't do it.
Yeah.
We depend on sampling strategies, as with everybody else, but we also depend on reporting after the fact if people do get sick. And the scary thing about this is, unlike with regular old ordinary food poisoning, lowercase f, lowercase p, if it's 2 to 9 hours to symptom onset and liver failure, you may not have an opportunity to report anything to anybody.
Right, exactly. And even if you can, you have to tell them exactly what it was. And how do you know what it was?
Yeah.
Another one of the treatments that they say that they often have to resort to is liver transplant. That was impossible back then. It's possible now, but it has a lot of complications.
Well, and also, how would you do that on a large scale?
You couldn't. You could, if you had 30 people coming in that need a liver transplant.
Wow.
Into just an ER today. I don't think you'd be able to do it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so this is really interesting. Yeah. I think they came up with a very interesting, but not necessarily, unrealistic scenario.
Yeah.
I think they did a good job picking this one.
I think they did, especially for the time. It's believable. It's not completely out there. Yes, you have the astute Viking and sticker. But I could see that making sense if you have a person who kind of just travels all over the place and sees a bunch of different stuff and is interested in learning new things.
So here's a question for you.
Yeah.
He in the show, he just happens not to eat the bread.
That's
and
true.
Because of that, people immediately suspect him.
Yeah.
Their attribution is very interesting. I don't know how they figure out that all these sick people ate the bread, but they do figure that out. And then they figure out that he didn't eat the bread Of course, just as they see him running off into the countryside
Right.
and don't realize he's trying to find tubers and instead think he's trying to escape because
Right.
he's trying to kill everybody, which is a great example of why you need to do a lot in the way of attribution before you start making these determinations.
Yeah.
But he did not eat the bread. So I know, it just sort of ran through my head. If a population here in the United States were to be attacked with this,
Mm-hmm.
it's possible that all the people who are eating low carb or no carb diets wouldn't get sick if it was in the flour.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think you're right.
It's just interesting.
It is interesting. Maybe Steger was on a low-carb diet.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I also wonder if it was in the mead.
In the mead.
But I know they don't mention it.
How would it have survived the alcohol?
I don't know.
It would have to.
I was wondering because they didn't mention it with the kid. Like, oh, did you drink too much mead?
Oh, well, that was just
night?
because they thought he was drunk or hungover
hungover.
or something. I don't think. Actually, a while ago, I looked to see. I was speaking down at Vanderbilt,
Mm-hmm.
and I think Jack Daniels is down there.
Oh.
I think. And I just was curious, could you introduce a biological agent into Jack Daniels, into the process? It turns out there are a few microorganisms that could survive that whole process, the distillation process, and could survive in the bottles. But it's so few. And it's really questionable whether you could take that and really sort of weaponize it and introduce it and all of that. So it's possible, but I would be surprised if this fungus, whole as it was, would somehow. Well, I don't. You know what? I shouldn't say that. I'm going to take it back, because toxins survive. One of the things they're concerned about is introduction of botulism, Clostridium botulinum, into the milk supply. People do talk about that. So it must survive liquid things, and it must survive some amount of pasteurization if people are worried about it. It's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know if the alcohol would inactivate it, because it's just a toxin. It's not a living organism at that point anymore.
Right.
So it might not. The alcohol might.
Or
not
how much alcohol would you need to inactivate it?
Yeah.
Would like grain alcohol do it?
Right.
Or vodka? Yeah. The Swiss do have these are the Swedes. Sorry, the Swedes do have some very powerful vodka, equivalents. So do the Russians, for that matter.
Yeah.
The Polish do too. So I don't know. It would be interesting to see.
Yeah.
And wouldn't that be interesting? Everybody drink all this alcohol.
Well, that's why I don't know if it was still true during this time period, but beforehand, at least, probably during this time period too, the reason why mead was drank was because the water wasn't necessarily safe, because they didn't know anything about germs or bacteria or viruses or parasites. So they wouldn't boil their water. So the mead they knew that was safe, because if you put the alcohol in it, it's going to kill the viruses, the bacteria, and the fungi. So that's why the child was drinking mead.
I see.
in the show.
Well, interesting implications.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
So they had some concept of infectious diseases, even though they didn't understand.
Yeah, you're suggesting, knowing this show, that they were drinking this for health-related reasons. I don't think that's the case, JT. Sorry, I'm not going to give you that one. I'm not.
Okay, it's a theory.
It is a theory.
It's a theory. Let's see. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on, or do you want to get to the ratings?
I think we can rate it.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, for relevance to commission recommendations, what did you think?
I gave it a 4.
A 4?
The implications for medical countermeasures, attribution, looking at the threat, look at what happens when you don't revisit the threat matrix and update your military stance, the need for leadership, the need for subject matter expertise. I think that's kind of a lot for a TV show.
Yeah, for an episode of a TV show that takes place.
What did you think?
I agree. I thought it had a lot of relevance, despite the fact that it takes place over 1,000 years ago, which I thought was one of the really interesting parts of it, was that it did still have that relevance to today.
Okay.
So yeah, I think a 4 sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, so the next category is scientific accuracy. I gave it a 4.
Okay.
Because given the time period, I think this plausibly makes sense. And given what I read about the mushrooms
but why didn't you give it a 5?
I didn't give it a 5 because of like the tubers and Stigger kind of just knowing what it was. I could see how it makes sense, but it's like we always talk about the astute clinician.
Yeah.
And here we have an astute Viking, like clinician.
Yeah.
So it's just a little bit far.
Okay.
Of a reach.
I gave it a 4.5, but we can give it a 4.
No, we can go 4.5, I think. Because I don't think maybe my gripe is only worth half a point. I didn't
see anything in this episode that I thought was wrong.
Yeah.
If you look up on the internet, do tubers contain antibiotics? There's some that contain antibiotics.
Okay.
We're not exactly sure which fungus was utilized, so it's possible that it could have been affected by the antibiotic or not.
Right.
It's hard to say, but it didn't feel completely unrealistic. There was nothing that I found that was wrong.
Yeah, and I think, just to add on to the category a little bit here with the historical accuracy, I think was, given the fact that this fungus has been known for thousands of years, it adds up, I think, or that they knew that fungus could poison people.
Yeah.
And that had been used in assassination.
Well, and I don't think they were that far behind scientifically as we would like.
I don't think
so. Granted, this one village they were trying to intentionally make you think like they're just, they're dancing and doing stuff and this is what they do with their lives every day. But meanwhile, they're using fully milled and processed flour.
Yeah.
And other storylines were showing some pretty advanced technological utilization for weapons.
Right.
So, I don't know that they were that far behind. And as we were saying earlier, not everything requires nation-state capabilities and investment in high-level laboratories.
Right.
I think they do a good job of showing that, and that is scientifically accurate. It's scientifically, as you said, and historically accurate.
Yeah. So, let's give it a 4.5.
Okay.
Scenario development, I think I gave it a 4.
I gave it a 3.
A 3? How come?
I didn't think it was that creative. Once somebody decided, okay, we need to infect these people somehow. How are we going to do that? They did a little bit of research. Maybe somebody knew about the mushrooms that were used by the Vikings to induce hallucinogenic, experiences.
Yeah.
Maybe they knew some of that. I don't think it would have taken them very, very long to get to that kind of a scenario.
Yeah.
And then the scenario itself is just sort of put mushrooms into a barrel. People eat and get sick.
And then get sick.
Yeah, it just didn't. What was so?
Yeah.
I didn't think it was that creative.
I give them points for being able to pull it off in in that setting, the historical time setting.
Okay.
But
what did you give it? A 4?
I gave it a 4, so maybe we'll do a 3.5.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. But I think that is a good point. It's not really. They could have gone farther with it. I think they could have made almost the whole episode about it.
Yeah.
I think, rather. I mean, of course, we want to see Leif. But yeah, I agree.
Okay.
Entertainment value, I gave it a 4.
So did I. I thought it was
entertaining.
Entertaining.
Success of the imagination, or creativity? What did you think?
So I thought it was imaginative. Somebody had to imagine this kind of attack.
Right.
And then they went to find whether it was possible or not, and then they must have realized, oh, there's this historical thing. That's one way they could have come to
Right.
it. The other is that they knew about something historically, as I said, and they just sort of backed into this, this other thing. But, I mean, see, originally I gave it a 5, but I'm not feeling like it's that imaginative and that creative.
Yeah. I think it's cool that they had the thought to put like a biological weapon in this this time period. I do think that was creative.
Well, and we have our graphic novel on the history of germ warfare, which does not include this.
No.
So we're going to have to talk to Max Brooks about that. But it is, I agree, it is. So maybe, what did you give it, a 4?
I gave it a 4.
Okay, let's give it a 4.
Okay.
Let's give it a 4.
Shock or surprise value?
I didn't think there was anything shocking about it. But for myself personally, I was surprised that they used a fungus. I didn't know all the stuff about fungi and their use in terms of attacking people or poisoning people or something. I didn't know about it.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty surprising too, because I think when I first saw the episode, I was expecting it to be like a regular infectious disease, which I would have believed less, I think, than it being a fungi. So yeah, I think, I don't know, I'd maybe say like a 3. Or do you think? What do you think? Higher?
Let me give it higher.
Higher?
Because there was something that was surprising about it. Maybe a 4?
Yeah, let's do a 4.
Give it a 4.
Okay. Government policy. I gave it a 2.
Yeah, so did I. I thought their policy, Freydis's policy, was terrible.
Yeah.
She completely let down not completely, but she did not pay attention to changing tactics.
Right.
She did not pay attention, other than mere passing attention, to the motivations of her enemies.
Right. Like you would think that, hey, you just killed this guy's dad. He might be a little mad about it.
Yeah. And if he's not going to come at it this way and you haven't seen him attack, why are you even believing him when he shows up, right? And doesn't he show up in this one? Does he show up yet?
I don't know if it's in this one or if it's in the next one.
Okay, but,
I think it's in the next one,
it just didn't seem like that was good policy on her part.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was good policy you just go and grab a barrel of something and you just start utilizing it and you don't
check it.
You don't check it, you don't test it. I mean, why not check it at least for bugs? Right? If they had dumped that, like you said, if they had sifted that entire barrel of flour, they would have found those mushrooms.
Right.
And whether they knew what they did or not, they would have just dumped that entire barrel.
Yeah.
So I thought the policy was terrible.
Yeah.
The whole government policy was terrible, including the people going after poor Stig as he's trying to find the tubers.
Yeah, right.
Their policy is we're just going to assume that because we see someone running and he didn't eat the bread that he's now guilty. What if they had killed him?
And they very well could have. When he came back in, they saw him giving Freydis the tubers. They seemed like they were ready to.
Yeah, that's terrible.
But he was good enough at self-defense and de-escalation that he was able to be like, hey, when I come back, if I actually did this.
Right. Yeah, so I say a 2.
Yeah, I agree. A 2. Okay. So how about portrayal by the actors or casting?
What did you think?
I think they all did a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, there were no actors that I thought were unbelievable in their roles. So I would say like a 4.
I thought they did a pretty good job too. I could go as high as a 5.
Yeah.
But to really know whether the actor's portrayal, not just of the biological weapons aspect, but of the sort of societal, cultural, historical. You'd really have to ask somebody from Sweden.
Yeah.
At least a current day Swede.
If it's accurate.
If it feels accurate or not. So I think a 4 is probably
good.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Sounds good. Direction. I gave this one a 4 as well.
Okay.
I thought it was.
I don't know how we would have directed it.
I don't know how I would have directed it any differently.
It just wasn't. I mean, they could have done a better job with the symptomology, I guess. Basically, we just see everybody lying around sick. Yeah. They could have done better with that. Probably. Yeah. It would have been interesting if it was both something that sickened people and that had the hallucinogenic properties. That would have been interesting.
Yeah. That would have been. I'm wondering. I'm like thinking of a movie where that might have been a thing, where somebody poisoned an entire food supply with hallucinogenics instead of lethal toxin. But I think there's some other shows that do touch on that.
Okay. Well,
that would be interesting.
So you said what, a 3.5, 4, a 4?
A 4.
Okay, let's give it a 4.
Okay. Production. I said 5.
Why?
I think everything looked good.
Huh.
It seemed to look like an old Viking village.
Okay.
What do you think?
I gave it a 3.5, but I don't, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know why I gave it a 3.5. Like, I don't know what I'm taking points off for.
Yeah.
It did seem, realism aside, it did seem like it was produced properly.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't anything in there that seemed modern day.
Yeah.
You know, they didn't have the wrong kind of wood, for example, or the costumes weren't off. So, okay, we can give it a 5.
Okay. Writing, I would say 3.5 or 4. I don't know if the pacing necessarily throughout the entire episode was great. With the back and forth between Leif's story and then this story. So I would say like 3.5.
I agree. I give it a 3.5, and the reason is, I think television shows that do this when they're jumping around, they usually have some kind of unifying message, some unifying point that each one of those storylines has something to do with.
They all connect somehow.
Yeah. And this didn't. It was like we're just going back and forth and back and forth, back and forth between two different things.
Right.
And then
two completely different parts of the world.
Yeah, except that they all have something to do with Vikings. I mean, I get that, but that doesn't seem, it's not as refined, I guess, or as high level as what you would see with Game of Thrones or any of these other things, which I think our rating is a reflection of where this show stands, how it does.
Yeah.
People enjoy it, but nobody goes, wow, this is the most amazing thing ever. Not because it's not interesting, because it is. I think it's this. Like, they're not connecting all these pieces. And I think if they did, then it would be even better than it was. It was really, I thought it was entertaining, all of it, but it just, you are kind of switching back and forth and back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. So what do you think, 3.5 or 4?
I say a 3.5.
Okay, 3.5. Okay. So that gives us a final rating of 3.86.
Okay.
Which is a good score.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great score.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you wanted to sign off with?
Well, this has nothing to do really with biological defense or anything, but I did think it was interesting to see their portrayal of Leif Erikson.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know a lot about Leif, even though I think we should know a lot about Leif in America, because they say there's a quote. They say Leif got here first.
Mm-hmm.
It was the Vikings. It was not Columbus. It was the Vikings that did. Now, I did kind of laugh in terms of direction and production quality that he seemed to be floating off at the end. with the tiniest flotilla of little rowboats
Yeah.
To get all the way across the Atlantic Ocean to America. I don't think that that was realistic, and I don't know why they did it that way. They could have, I don't want to say they should have, because you only have so much money, but they could have shot those boats differently and made them look
bigger,
humongous if they wanted to. Or they could have just done like one part of said boat and just implied that there was a much bigger thing there, a much bigger vessel.
And it's not like they didn't know how to make boats. They were pretty darn good at it.
Yes,
They've been good at it for a long time.
And we have historical evidence that he did get to America, and he got all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
So, as did the Vikings. I mean, not just him. So, what I think we should end by just simply saying, first of all, hats off to Leif Erikson and the Swedes for going around and doing all the things that they did, with the exception of maybe the raping and the pillaging and all that. But one does wonder if the whole storyline might not have repeated itself, if he came to America and ate those same mushrooms. They're here.
They are here. I think they got brought over to America.
Intentionally?
I don't know if it was intentional or not.
So maybe he brought them.
Maybe he did.
We don't know.
Yeah, we'll never know.
Yeah.
We'll have to... This is why I wish the Vikings wrote more. So
yeah.
we could know.
Yeah, but I don't think they get enough credit for... Well, the entire culture doesn't get enough credit. We have so many... even the days of the week...
Are named
so many of them are named after Norse gods. And the Swedes, many of the Swedes left Sweden and went to Russia.
Yeah.
So
they would do a lot of their pillaging and...
Well, it's just that they spread in so many different countries and so many different places. Yeah.
I mean, down to the Middle East, to Russia, to the Americas.
Yeah. So we credit Leif, but I think we should have also credited people like Stig who knew.
Yeah, who knew?
Who knew about this in terms of the annals of biological weapons and biodefense.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.